And without being licensed, there are only jobs like that available. So for me, I was like, I need to get licensed. I need to move on. So yes, this is a true life story. But now before you, I stand as a licensed professional counselor here in Tennessee. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, so we're talking about hope. And maybe the first time we had to hope, it wasn't too bad. But then the second time and the third time and every time after that, it's hard. Mostly because we've probably experienced hope delayed, hope unmet, or the worst, hope failed. There is this couple that I think about often. I don't know if any of you watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I know that we have a younger crowd here, but you know, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Join in. A beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I was about 4 years old when I met the neighbors that would be my favorite ever in my life. Their names were Mr. Peter and Mrs. Wanda. And that's their first names because I couldn't pronounce their last names. They had Polish last names, so that's why I called them Mr. Peter and Mrs. Wanda. But one day, Mr. Peter was gardening. He was tending to the flowers. He had his glove on. He had his little tool, and he's like doing work or whatever. We just moved into the neighborhood, and 4-year-old me just goes up to the little wire fence, and I have my fingers in the fence, and I'm like, "Hey, what's your name?" They say they fell in love with me like the first time they saw me, and I'm like, I sound obnoxious. So I'm not getting that. But since that day, they frequently invited me over to their house. And my parents took advantage of this. What I mean is they didn't let me out of the house unless I did what they wanted me to do, right? Whether it was chores, whether it was homework, or whether it was something I normally don't have to do but need to do if I want to go to Mr. Peter's house. It was at Mr. Peter's house that I got my love of cheese. Ashlyn Phillip calls me cheese because I love cheese. I mean, it's so strange. I gained a lot of weight. I would go over and they would cut me pieces of mozzarella cheese. And that was just like my favorite thing ever because my parents would never buy blocks of mozzarella cheese and give it to me as a snack. And then every Saturday, they would take me to the McDonald's play place. Right? I had my Happy Meal, and I got to play, and then we went shopping afterward. So, I mean, I'm talking every Saturday. And then for every birthday, I could expect a minimum of $50 and probably a gift. Okay? And this was a really big deal. I mean, they couldn't have kids, and so they really did treat me like I was one of theirs. And it was a big deal because in my childhood, my family was struggling a lot. A lot of relationship things, but a lot of financial things too. I mean, I remember walking around the grocery store asking my mom if I could have a Snickers, and she couldn't buy it for me, So it was a really tough time. So you can imagine how great it was for little Sheva to have neighbors like this. It's like Christmas every Saturday. I don't think I even knew how to value the treasure that I had with them. So I was their neighbor, my family and I. We were their neighbors until I was about 12, which is when we moved to Tennessee. And it was hard for me to come to Tennessee, mostly because I'd be losing them. As I got older, I got pretty busy, but they still sent a birthday card every year, and they looked forward to my phone calls. Sometimes Mr. Peter would have a dream that I showed up or something like that. But like I said, I got busy, and that's another way of saying I was very self-centered and I didn't make a priority to keep in touch with them. But even though, like, on a regular basis, I didn't contact them, I still tried, like, every 2 or 3 years to at least go visit New York to see them. Because I do have a strong love for them, but, you know, even my closest friends will know I'm terrible with communication, and I hate the phone, and I wish they texted because that would be awesome. I just hate talking on the phone, and so just because of that odd habit, I just didn't make the phone calls to keep in touch. Well, one year, when I called and I said I wanted to visit, Mrs. Wanda said that Mr. Peter wasn't doing too well. In fact, he couldn't even walk, and he had trouble communicating. He was in a wheelchair, and I'm like, what? When did this happen? And, well, there was a lot they didn't tell me because I guess they always saw me as that little kid, and they didn't want to burden me with what, you know, they felt was like their problem, their health problems. And, yeah, so I was shocked, and she didn't tell me what was wrong with him, but I knew I needed to see him as soon as possible. And I found this out right around the time some people call it rededicating their life to Christ, having an awakening moment, whatever. I just wanted to change. And this was in the early part of college. And I guess you could say I was on fire at the time, and I was all about putting my faith in the God of the impossible. And there was a book that I was reading by Smith Wigglesworth. I don't know how many of you guys know Smith Wigglesworth, but he was a big deal in England as far as the healing ministry went. I mean, that man would pray, and gallstones, cancer, appendicitis, be gone. Okay? He was one of those slap you on the head ministers, and sometimes he would push people so hard that they would fall to the ground painfully, and when challenged and when questioned about this, he'd respond, I don't hit them, I hit the devil. Awesome guy. I was really impressed. And so, yeah, he wrote all about faith, and I had it in my mind I was going to visit New York, I was going to pray for Mr. Peter, and he is going to walk. Let me just insert that this Polish family is Roman Catholic. They didn't have a lot of experience with the charismatic, and I mean, they were devout, good people, but they weren't really expressive. Like, they don't raise their hands in church. They don't make any noise. You know, there's no confirmation whether you're doing well or not. It's like quiet, right? The only time that they're going to talk is when they're repeating the liturgy. So, would that stop me? Firebrand Shepherd? No way. Okay? People told me, what if you offend them? What if it doesn't work? What if you just look dumb? And I didn't care because I loved this family. He could not be sick. He could not be unwell. He did not deserve this. If there was a good person on earth, it was him, and he loved Jesus, and he shouldn't have to suffer. I went to New York, and I told Mr. Peter that I was going to pray for him. He and his wife did not fight me. They did not shame me. They loved me, and they understood where my heart was coming from. So I started praying passionately for Mr. Peter, and I spoke in faith, and I knew that it was already done, and I was convinced that when I opened my eyes, he's going to be standing in front of me. And I opened my eyes, and he wasn't. But did I give up? No. I said, give me your hands. Yes, I told this elderly gentleman to give me your hands, and I tried to help him up, in faith, right? He stayed up for maybe a second, and then he couldn't. He had to sit back down and crushed. I was crushed. But I wasn't going to stop believing that one day it's going to happen, just not today. Fast forward maybe half a year, I was in my room, chilling with some friends, and I got a phone call. Mr. Peter's dead. Apparently, for 10 years, his doctor had been giving him the wrong medication, even though Mrs. Wanda told him, the doctor, that it's not working, he's just getting worse, and the doctor just kept doing it. And one day, his lungs just collapsed, and he was taken to the ER, and the ER doctor was like, "What? Who was giving him this medication for this long?" Hope failed. So yeah, hope is hard. My clicker's not working. All right, so the Israelites definitely had this experience of hope being difficult in history. So they knew what it felt like to have hope delayed, hope unmet, and hope seemingly failing. There were two ways in which I want to talk about the struggle of their hope. The first way that they experienced struggle with hope was with Abraham. Abraham was the first one to have hope because God chose to make a promise with him. This is where the story of the Israelites began. For a while, Abraham lived in hope unmet, hope delayed, and then Hebrews 11:13 actually tells us that he died in faith, not having received the promise, but still dying with the hope that one day it would happen. I had a slide for you guys about what the promise was. Abraham was promised that his descendants would become a nation. This is one guy, all right? Apparently he's going to have children as numerous as the sands, on the reaches of the sea, and they are going to become a nation, and they're going to be blessed, and they're going to bless the entire world. This is the promise to Abraham. And so, as Abraham and the stories of his descendants go on, as Abraham eventually, a lot happens in between. They get to Egypt, his descendants, and then they end up being enslaved in Egypt, which, hold on, wait, I thought the promise was we were going to be free, independent, free, and blessing other people. Not what was happening when they were enslaved in Egypt. So they were in need of a God who saves. Okay, so God finally saves them. They become a nation. David was the king who maintained covenant with God. And then not only did they become a nation, but they became blessed. And they became successful, right? So the promise, there was bullet points 1, 2, and 3, but 1 and 2 basically had said, that they'd become a nation, that they'd be blessed, just waiting for 3, where they bless everybody else. But at least to this point, it's looking like the promise is coming true when David is king. Okay, well, here's the next struggle with hope. David's kingdom of wealth, health, and success breaks apart. Just when they thought that the promises of God were coming true, it was taken away, and hope failed. It's one thing to be Abraham and be living in your home and then having God say, "Oh, you have to go out somewhere." Hey, looks like we got it up. Give me a second while I try to adjust. All right, clicker, be gone. Okay, and I keep losing my spot every time I try to fool with that clicker. Maybe they'll be able to keep up with me, and if they hear something, try and find the right slide. Okay, so Abraham. It was one thing to be in his home. It was one thing that he had to leave, and he had to believe that there was some promise out there, okay? That's not easy, to leave everything that you know, everyone that you know, and not know where you're going. Not cool. That's one thing. But then it's another thing to get to the point where you feel like, oh, I arrived at that place that I was supposed to be at. I have everything, and then lose it. That's just a different kind of struggle with hope. Like, I mean, I can't believe that. So what? There was Abraham, and then the promise was supposed to come through Isaac. Cool. But then he was supposed to be sacrificed. But then he wasn't. Isaac has 2 sons. They end up fighting with each other. Jacob ends up stealing the promise. And then he has sons. And then his son Joseph ends up having problems with all the rest of the brothers. See this like pattern of family strife just going all over the place? All right, so then Joseph was hated by his brothers, thrown in jail, right? Eventually, he kind of got to a better place, and with his power and his influence, he was able to help his people. And so his people came to Egypt, where he was, but then that's when they got enslaved, right? And then God takes them out, and then they go to the desert, and they walk around for 40 years for a journey that should not have taken anywhere near that long. And then finally, they go into the promised land, Canaan, and then they become that nation, and then David's kingdom, and then when it breaks apart, Babylon comes in, and they're enslaved again. And yet, God still wanted them to keep believing. 1 Corinthians 13:13 says, and now these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. I had this quote for you guys. It said, we are called to live by hope rather than possession. Hope is something that's out there, not something I have possessing right here. By what is promised, then what has already come. I think God wanted them to believe because he knew he was not done yet. When he made us, when he made his people, he always intended us to be a people of faith that don't possess or hold on to what we see. Instead, we hold on to what we heard by promise. God's promise took time, days, years, hundreds of them, until finally God came down himself, talking post-Babylonian exile. God came down himself, working out the promise in Jesus. God was going to keep his promise. Through Israel, he was going to bless the rest of the world. Through Abraham, which eventually came David, which eventually came Jesus, God wills to be our God and for us to be his people and to make the world new. And so we see Jesus in his life showing people miracles. Why does he do these miracles? To show what the kingdom of God is going to be like. One day, the lame will walk and the blind will see. There will be restoration. Women and slaves, and they'll all be redeemed, the unclean. He not only showed miracles, but he also gave teachings to talk about the way of the kingdom, what things were going to look like when the promise is fully fulfilled. And then he died. Death is the one condition that ends a promise. What do I mean? Even with marriage, we say, till death do us part. Because after death, there's nothing, right? So Jesus dies. That's the end of the promise. Now, This is the one promise that goes beyond death. Because he rose. And he came on the other side of death. So when we die, it's not our end. When we die, there's a path of life for us to follow. So yeah, he's going to be our God. We're going to be his people. We're going to be in a new world, and we don't have to be afraid of death. But we know that people still die. We know that people get sick. Death has yet to be fully defeated, and guess what? God's still not done yet. The same way God asked Abraham to believe, hope, and wait, Jesus came to tell us what? To believe, to hope, and to wait. And so that's where we're at now. Sharing Israel's struggle to hope for something better. But it's so hard to hope. When we see a verse like this, it doesn't help. Hebrews 11, verse 6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Okay, if it's impossible and it's hard to have hope, that means I don't have any faith. So what does that mean for me? I am stuck. Let me share a little secret. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. That's interesting. That's not how I remember the story. Genesis chapter 18, 10 through 12. The Lord said, I'm going to come back. Sarah, your wife, she's going to have a son. And Sarah was listening. And the thing was, Sarah was old, and the way of women ceased to be with Sarah. And so what does she do? She laughed. Hebrews 11:11. By faith, Sarah. Where did she get faith from with an attitude like that? From where did that faith come? Because I didn't hear an inkling of hope in that. I don't even see a point later where it says, oh, she, believed now. I'm about to wrap up soon, so the worship team can go ahead and come up. God is the one who gives faith. Because y'all know Sarah could not muster it up on her own. God must have been the one who had given faith. You can find it in the scriptures, 1 Corinthians 12:9, Romans 12:3. And we've heard the cry of, God, help my unbelief. Help my lack of hope. Help my inability to have faith. And so God helps our unbelief. And as we go into musical worship, I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're at hope delayed, at hope unmet, or at where hope seemingly has failed. That's okay. Because when you have nothing left, you have brothers and sisters here that will hope for you, that will have faith for you, that will intercede for you. And don't tell me that you can't have faith for someone else, because when the man who couldn't walk and his friends opened the rooftop and lowered him in, and he's paralyzed, he's not talking, nothing's happening, Jesus says, because of the faith of your friends. Paralyzed man could not even say, oh, I receive you as my Lord and Savior, please forgive my sins, without even saying anything, Jesus says, you are forgiven. Without the guy even saying anything. And then after the soul healing came the flesh healing, the bodily healing. So don't tell me someone cannot have faith for you. We here at Stonehouse will be walking with you guys. We will be ready to sit with you guys. We will be ready to open up our homes to you. We'll be ready to share our lives with you. I mean, if you haven't been able to tell that yet, here I am. I talk about my story. I know Josh talked about his story. Please check out his message and encourage him as he continues to speak and grow in all of that. So I guess I'm just asking one thing tonight. I'm just asking that you open yourself up. Not just for today, because it might not come today. So for every day moving forward, just please be open, because when it's pouring, I don't want, your vessel to be shut. I want you to be in a position, in a posture of, yes, I'm ready. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to perform. You don't have to work. You just have to open up and try and catch the ball that God wants to throw you.